Good morning. I wish to thank you, particularly the chair of the subcommittee on human rights, Ms. Barbara Lochbihler, to give me this opportunity to share with you some of my recent work as the UN Special Rapporteur on the human right to water and sanitation. I am sad not to be able to be with you physically at the Parliament, but I am currently conducting a regional consultation for a handbook that I am preparing on the implementation of the rights to water and sanitation. I will talk about it a little bit more later, and I had already set the dates a long time ago, many months ago, for this regional conference. But before introducing my work, I am pleased to share with you some recent developments on the political commitment to the rights to water and sanitation at the UN. This September, the Human Rights Council adopted by consensus a new resolution on the rights to water and sanitation, which enjoyed 110 co-sponsors, including EU member states. In its resolution, the Council agreed on the definition of the rights to water and sanitation for the first time. Before, the definition has been conveyed by experts like me or the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. But this time, it's UN member states, including EU member states, that agree on a definition of what the human rights to water and sanitation means. And why is this important? Because this definition will help us at the national level, local level, but also at the regional and international level to better shape policies and programs and actions in the areas of WASH. So the definition says that the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation entitles everyone without discrimination to have access to sufficient, safe, affordable and acceptable, physically accessible water for personal and domestic use, and physical and affordable access to sanitation in all spheres of life that is safe, hygienic, secure and acceptable and provides privacy and ensures dignity. As you, at the moment where you will watch this video, hopefully a similar resolution has been already also adopted by consensus by the UN General Assembly containing the very same definition. I think this is another important milestone in the promotion of the rights to water and sanitation. So now let me share with you some of the recent focuses of my work as rapporteur. Over the past 2 years, I have been working closely with UNICEF and WHO under the umbrella of the Joint Monitoring Program for Water and Sanitation to develop concrete proposals for concrete goals, targets and indicators for water and sanitation for the post-2015 development agenda. And it was not by accident that I volunteered to create a working group and to chair it on the issue of inequalities, as I think that inequalities, the persistence of inequalities and the indifference to the persistent and even to the widening of inequalities in the world is the biggest gap of the current development agenda, global development agenda. During the missions that I undertake to different countries of the world, in different regions of the world, I've been in Europe and in Africa, I've been in the Pacific, in Asia, in North America, in South America, and in all these missions I encountered incidences of lack of access to adequate water and sanitation, where people belonging to a specific group or to specific groups are categorically neglected or even ignored compared to the rest of the society. As you know, there is often stigma, there are discriminatory attitudes and practices within societies as causes of inequalities. But at a very practical level, the current global trend and the global monitoring, of progress of the MDG framework does not require states and other actors to pay attention to these groups. So because of the focus on aggregate incomes, on success stories, states and other actors are able to go for the low-hanging fruit and to achieve the goals. And in fact, the current agenda gives carte blanche to all of us to ignore the most vulnerable and marginalized, not do anything about them. And even in these situations, in those cases where progress has not reached these people, states are still able to see themselves as MDG heroes. So I have developed a tool to measure the elimination of inequalities, and this can also be applied to other goals and targets. And of course, I would be very happy if the European Parliament could be another voice in supporting such a commitment to be included in the post-2015 agenda. So basically, the proposal aims at making sure that, number one, we disaggregate the data, for example, between rural and urban areas. Let's think about sanitation and country X. Imagine that in the urban area there is 60% of access to sanitation, in rural areas 20%. We identify a gap. So this is the first point. We collect the data, we monitor, we identify a gap. And then after we identify this 4-point gap, and after we know what the end date of the post-2015 agenda will be, let's imagine it's 2030, and let's imagine that, that the objective, the goal will be to achieve universal access to sanitation, then it means that we will have, each country will have to draw a graph where it will be able to delineate the rate of progress necessary to making sure that universal access is achieved. So if you disaggregate this information according to rural and urban differences, you will see that the rate of progress necessary to lift up, to making sure that the people living in rural areas get to universal access is much higher than the rate of progress necessary to making sure that people in urban areas reach universal access. And this simple graph, this simple mechanism already shows us that business as usual was wrong. It was completely wrong. We took the wrong approach, since we were putting more efforts on those who were already better off, instead of doing exactly the opposite, putting more efforts in those that have been traditionally left behind. And without this, also studies, there was a very recent study by Save the Children where it was shown that without eliminating inequalities progressively, without addressing inequalities from the outset, we will never be able to reach universal goals that will be framed in the framework, in the context of the post-2015 agenda. So, in order to achieve universal access, we need to start now to target the most disadvantaged and the most marginalized and lift them up. Otherwise, we will never achieve universal access to whichever development goal in 15 years' time. And I, again, think that the EU could and should be a strong ally to integrate and operationalize the elimination of inequalities in the post-2015 development agenda. And moreover, inequalities are obviously not only about the developing countries' problems. Also, in the richest countries, inequalities exist. But also, the EU as donor has to commit not to repeat the same mistakes made by the MDGs, and also promote the elimination of inequalities in the countries, in the partner countries that the EU is working with. Addressing inequalities is not only a human rights, a moral and an ethical must. It makes sense politically and economically. Yes, reaching out to people living in rural areas, for example, does cost money. But please think also about the cost of not addressing them. I am confident that you all agree that we don't want a world with instability caused by inequalities. Let us just think of the protests last summer in Brazil. And we do not want a world where millions of people suffering from waterborne diseases occupy 50% of hospital beds, as is the case in developing countries, or where women and people suffering from waterborne diseases miss school and work. Okay, now moving from the post-2015 agenda to another part of my work, I would like to tell you, to develop on something that I mentioned at the beginning, namely the fact that I'm developing a handbook for realizing the rights to water and sanitation. Because wherever I go, I am constantly asked the same questions. We agree that wash is a human right. For example, in the context of the EU, the 28 member states have recognized water and sanitation as a human right. But states often tell me we don't know how to implement it. We don't know how to do it. Tell us how to do it. Tell us how to realize it. And since I don't have a set of answers to give to countries and tell them here it is, this led me to the idea of developing a handbook, a very practical handbook, to realize the rights to water and sanitation, to provide practical guidance for states at the national, regional and local levels, and to assist them in overcoming the challenges presented in realizing the rights when they develop laws, policies, budgets, and how governments can be held to account for their actions, and indeed for their lack of action in ensuring universal access to water and sanitation. My proposal to develop this handbook was welcomed by a wide range of stakeholders, and I have developed partnerships with relevant actors, including UNICEF, UN Habitat, and several NGOs, in addition to the governments of Switzerland, Finland, Germany, and Spain. Please do write to me or visit my website if you would also like to engage with me in this process. To make the handbook practical and useful, I'm organizing regional consultations in Bolivia, where I will be at the time that you listen to this video, and in Nepal in January. In September, I sent a note verbal to all UN member states to ask a few questions, and I'm also conducting online consultations to really understand the nature of the challenges in realizing these rights so that we can identify and clarify the solutions. The handbook, which will be published in September next year, will consist of legal analysis and guidance on specific aspects of the rights, such as the obligations of states at national and subnational level in ensuring participation in decision-making processes, such as budget development and budget tracking. It will present the elements that states need to consider in developing or reforming legislation and policy on water and sanitation to ensure that they will lead to realizing the rights to water and sanitation. I will also be using experiences that our partners share with us to illustrate this analysis and guidance, and will also provide checklists and recommendations to make the advice as practical as possible, so that states and other actors, including international and regional organizations, can turn the rights into reality for the billions of people without access to safe, affordable, acceptable toilets, and the hundreds of millions of people without access to safe and affordable water. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that in the future we will have other occasions to meet face to face. Thank you so much, and thank you again for the opportunity and for listening to me.